And when I would try and talk to people that lived there, they'd say, "Oh, this is normal." Like everybody has selective amnesia. So you ask this question, like, how did this happen?
Hmm.
I don't know, but I don't think it's an accident to have people distracted from the core of what makes them a human being.
Yes.
And when you say what practices can you take on, I mean, my God, if you haven't taken them on now, man,
Hmm.
you know, I think that if your eyes are starting to open like right now, you're going to be absolutely dropped to your knees with what you're looking at. If you're
Hmm.
just awakening now.
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world.
Hello there. Welcome back to the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And I am your ever present host, Dean Walker, on the outer reaches of the interwebs here in a little organization called Living Resilience. And this podcast, which is called The Poetry of Predicament, and it's a YouTube channel. And we've been doing this for about 10 years now in service to the collapse aware and collapse acceptant communities. And I'm really, I'm engaged in a way in this work after 10 years that I never would have guessed. And I can talk a little bit about that as we step further and further into this, the first of three sections of interview with my guest, who is also on the screen, Allison. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And Allison Frank, we have a number of friends in common, and we have some experience in common. I think we met in a grief series that was provided by an organization here in Southern Oregon called Winter Spring.
We
And
did.
it was loosely based on the work that reconnects from, uh, uh, oh my goodness, help me remember.
Joanna Macy?
Joanna Macy, thank you very much. My mind went completely blank. We're, of course, one of the pioneers in the inner work of collapse in Joanna Macy and the work that reconnects. And I was enchanted by that particular iteration of the Winter Spring series, a grief workshop spread out over, I think it was 8 or 10 weeks. And so that went well, and it was great to sort of get to know one another in a group setting a little bit online. But because we have other friends, and anyway, you are mentioned to me quite often, and especially you were mentioned quite often in some circles that we have similar friends in. When you and the entire population in and around Asheville, North Carolina, were slammed by Hurricane, oh, sorry, I'm having on
It was Helene.
Helene, thank you. Wow, my memory right now this is bizarre. Okay. Joanna Macy, Hurricane Helene. All right, I'm back. So, Allison, I consider this really the first chance to really get to know one another in a deeper way, as we've somehow been able to connect a number of times since you first experienced the hurricane, and you then had an extraordinary story unfold as you left Asheville, had extensive travel. And what I've noticed in the number of times I've heard you be able to speak about sections of this story is I've learned that you are an extraordinary uh, storyteller, and I actually want to say articulator. You can articulate and you can share in a way that is so real and direct. And this is the scale of these times. This kind of ability to share deeply and to share vulnerably about really existential level concerns straight out of your life, straight out of the current experience of your life. That it's just really been a pleasure. And I don't mean that in an offhand way. It's been a pleasure to be with someone who has that amount of presence after going through what you've gone through. I consider that a pretty high attainment. That's a level of presence that most people who have ever lived or are alive now can only dream of. So for folks who are watching, I know that this can sound a little bit too flowery or what's he talking about? We'll get there. We're going to do, I think we're going to end up doing 3 interview segments with you, Allison Frank. And I
Okay.
am so looking forward to that. And I'm wondering if you could start us out with just a little bit about some of how you grew up, some of how you formulated through your younger life, and you started to put together some kind of skill set that has ended up um, inviting you to do quite extraordinary work with people that you just call normal. And I think that's a big part of how you've come to be the speaker that you are, the sharing voice that you are. And then take us, if you would, into your experience of Asheville before and after, and then off we go. Wherever we go from that point on, I know it will be extraordinary. So, Allison, thanks so much for being willing to come on to the Poetry Predicament. You've now come on and kind of dipped your toe in the water of a couple of the courses, a couple of support groups, and experiential practice groups here in Living Resilience. And just every time you're a part of a circle, it is that much brighter. It is that much more vivid. So welcome
Thank
and
you.
start us where you will. How did you become the Allison that moved to Asheville, North Carolina?
Well, I have always been a bit of a vagabond. My personal philosophy and my family's philosophy never really meshed at all. I was always curious and a seeker, and you alluded to this, but I am a practicing psychic, and it's not something I went looking for. It was something that happened to me. I remember the night it happened. I was in the 5th grade and I was camping and I looked at the moon and something happened.
Hmm.
And so from a very young age, fortunately or unfortunately, I would get psychic impressions of things that would come true. Nobody really wanted to hear it. or didn't believe it, but it was just, I, Lady Gaga said it like this: I was born this way. This is just who I am.
Hmm.
So, um, when I was 19 years old, I was in a Volkswagen van with all these ex-captains from the Vietnam War, and we were headed towards Washington, D.C. to protest the war. And a guy sitting next to me reached in his backpack and he pulls out a deck of tarot cards and he goes, "Do you want these?" Well, that was a long time ago, and so I didn't know what they were. And I looked at them, I was like, "Yeah, I want those. I know that there's something." So I went and protested the war. I got tear gassed. I got arrested. I was part of the mob
Hmm.
and went back to my home in Tampa with these cards. And I was in college, took them out, did a reading for my roommate at age 19, and everything the card said came true. So that was like the beginning where I was like, okay, I could put together all the stuff I was getting was something concrete. So
Hmm.
that's where this started. And it's just been like that sort of ever since.
Yeah.
And I really, really valued that part of me. And I love spirituality and I love helping people, which is what I do with tarot cards. And it's just something I've done this for 53 years. So that's one part of my personality. Another part of my personality is that I am incredibly curious and engaged in world events. So these are two systems that don't seem to connect on a rational level, but like I have a foot in both worlds. And I think that's why I can articulate things because I get it from both sides, but I'm extremely observant about my environment, about what's going on in the world, how people are responding. And so um to jump ahead a bit,
Can I pause you before you jump ahead?
sure.
There's every once in a while I want to pepper in a few elements from this body of work, this living resilience stuff. Because really the coursework is designed to be in service of how can we expand our capacity to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors. And
That's
these, that notice it isn't about fixing the world. It isn't about Green New Deals. It's not about environment. It's really about how can we expand our capacity to be present. And you've just mentioned two elements of presence. Let's see if I can remember both of them given my memory today. Um, One of the coins of the realm around here in this work of reclaiming our center, both individually and collectively, because we've been knocked off our center to the extent that we're now a self-terminating culture. That's how off center we are. But you mentioned about curiosity as just a natural exuding part of you is what the way I heard you talking about it. Yeah. So I'm I'll just keep doing this from time to time. I'll just keep flagging and hopefully making note of an element that really fits well in this stuff that we do in the courses and the support groups and so on. And yet I also do not want to overtalk it, and I don't want to get in the way of you getting more story out. So please continue. You were just about to kind of change gears on us. And so
well, okay.
go ahead.
Um,
Yeah.
I want to answer your first question about how we expand. in the face of these stressors
Hmm.
and how we stay present. And we have to face what's real in front of us.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying this is easy, but there's an adaptation portion where you can't tweak the world to be the way you want it. You need to live in it as it presents itself.
Hmm.
And I think that's very difficult, but I also think it makes your life bigger and more expanded to be able to accept what you're going through and just ride the wave. You know,
Exactly.
the Hopis say the time of the world that we're in, you have to ride the wave and see who's on the wave with you, who's in the river with you. Um, so I guess learned to do that as a way of not getting jammed up by what the external noise was outside.
Hmm.
Like I always would look at what I felt was real, not what somebody was telling me. And I can read things, I get psychic imprints, and that's not always it's not always a great thing, but I've learned that it's very helpful to be honest about what you get, what you feel. I think Americans have been sold a bill of goods about not being their authentic selves. It is bred out of the culture.
Hmm.
And we are conditioned to believe and brainwashed to believe that we cannot question what we are being told. So, I come from that activist protest thing. There was a bumper sticker when I was in college and it said question authority.
Right, right.
I mean, and it just the minute you saw those words, it it's like giving you permission to be who you are.
Hmm.
And so I just absorbed that and
Yeah,
accepted it. And I mean, it got me in a ton of trouble
right.
all the time. I always was going up against the authorities or fighting the institutions that were corrupt. Trying like I would be in groups and I would do it by myself, but that's sort of how I've behaved in the face of all of this. So, this is how you expand. You trust your intuition, and that's where the psychic part comes in. And if we were alive 1,000 years ago and people were psychic, there were wisdom schools. We don't have that.
Right.
We don't have a way to acknowledge that this is our God-given right. It is the sixth sense that every human being is born with, and I am not an exceptional being. I just like it.
Yeah.
And I try and give that to my clients. It's like, oh my God, it's Americans are spiritually starving.
Right.
So, I think that's why people on Good Friday and Cyber Monday this year went out and spent $23 billion
Yeah.
because they're filling up this wound and it can't fill it up with tinsel.
Yeah. I think you're
You know,
talking about Black Friday, but I definitely get you.
yeah.
Um, if let me just try a little summary, loop us back to where I think we were, where you were just about to shift gears with us. And you were talking about being able to somehow be functional in two worlds, in both worlds. You're not the first person I've heard say that, and I've certainly said that enough myself. And I specifically wanted to underscore your use of the word curiosity, that you could count on, that you were a curious person. You are a curious person. And I'm going to assume for a moment, and please set me straight if it's not this way, but you were able to generate that curiosity both in the sovereign world of what you're seeing revealed to you and the world of the business as usual culture. You were able to somehow generate some amount of curiosity for both worlds. Is that fair to say?
It is, absolutely.
Okay. How about if we move into whatever this next chapter wants to be, and you take us where you want to take us toward your eventual Asheville lifetime, life experience, lifestyle.
Well, okay. I would, at this juncture, I would like to mention the fact that, and I've told you this before, I knew at a young age that when I was old, I was going to be in service to humanity. It's been in my soul ever since I was born.
Hmm.
I did expect this to be sooner than it is. I thought this was going to happen way sooner. I've seen this being the collapse and the chaos and everything. I saw it. So it one of the things that happened that's always stuck out in my mind when I was 30 years old, it was very, very up for me that I could see this very clearly. And I went to a therapist because I thought I need to talk to somebody about this, and I thought that the therapist would be helpful. And he looked at me like I was out of my mind and he told me to shut up and go live my life and not worry about it. So he completely dismissed it.
Mm.
And I've experienced that through my whole life, but I have had this knowing that we were going to be here. So I didn't talk about it much. I mean, in all honesty, these conversations really didn't really start to surface until about maybe 10, 15 years ago, where you could feel comfortable about saying you were a psychic or saying that you saw something or that you felt something without being completely disregarded. And that's not a good thing, to have people look at you like you're out of your mind, because that's a threat. And then you got to protect yourself anyway.
Yeah.
But I think that because this is a collapse conversation, that one of the most instrumental things that happened to me was 25 years ago. Tom Hartman, I don't know if you know who he is, but he wrote a
Sure.
book called The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight.
Yep.
And I don't know, I was in a bookstore and it's that thing where the book comes off the shelf.
Okay.
And I was like, that's a really interesting title. I don't know what it means, but I bought the book.
Hmm.
And it was about he had a vision about what collapse was going to look like. That was his book.
Yep.
And he wrote it in 1998. And I read the book and I was like, uh-oh, this is the blueprint for what's about to occur. And I bought about 10 copies of the book and I gave it to everybody I knew because I said, you have to read the book. And nobody did. However, it lit me up. It's like, it backed me up to when Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring in 1962. I mean, it all these little pieces, tendrils, tentacles of information all started to merge together
Hmm.
in a bigger picture that it's recent enough that things had already started happening. Things started already getting out of whack and weird and unpredictable, and nobody was addressing that, but you could see it. Like if you were out in nature, you could pay attention.
Hmm.
So I I started consuming voluminous amounts of material, every single thing I could find about climate change. And it wasn't called that, really. It didn't have that moniker at that point. And and there wasn't much to read. But I was following the threads, and I found the scientists, and I read the books, and I anything connected with that, because in my body, it's not even something I was conscious of. It was like screaming at me that we were on a trajectory that was scary.
Yeah.
So, you know, so that was the beginning where I started paying attention, and then watching all the strange things happen. Um, and every strange thing, I can give you an example. Like when I was living in Seattle, that was well, this was before the book, actually. It was like 1995. I woke up on Thanksgiving morning, and was getting ready to go to a party, and was getting dressed and had the TV on, and they were making an announcement that the Hanford nuclear plant was leaking radioactive waste into the aquifer. Well, all my alarm bells went off. So I'm going to this party with all these lovely journalists, like really awesome journalists. And I go to the party and I tell them what I just saw, and they're like, don't worry about it. And that really bothered me, because I went home and packed up all my shit. And that's when I moved to Asheville.
Hmm.
It's like it it scared me. And that's like, well, they're not paying attention, but I'm leaving.
You know approximately when that was, year-wise?
I got to Asheville in 1997.
Hmm.
So that's how I got to Asheville. Was an event, because I know this sounds absolutely bizarre, but like I can't understand how people can see these big, huge things and just go into denial and pretend like it's not happening. And and we see that everywhere, based on what we're going through right now.
Yeah.
We don't have to talk about the politics now, but that's part of the problem. So that is how I landed in Asheville. So Asheville was a little bitty city. It was not on anybody's radar. It was safe. It was a little tiny mountain town. There was nothing there. So I was like, I'm going to move there and be safe and hunker down and see what happens.
Got it. Yeah.
So,
Well, flash forward to, you going through year after year of getting to know people, becoming more and more of a fixture in that environment yourself, and it kind of got some reputation. I mean, I'm on the other side of the country, and I've heard of Asheville, and that for years and years and years, and I'm over here in Ashland, Oregon, and that has its own reputation. So I'm with you. I get it. And at some point, uh, it actually quite recently has become spoken of as one of the better places to try and survive some of the heating and some of the extreme weather and so on, up until some sort of large scale event recently. Yeah. So it's interesting how that became something of its own little hub of possible community, possible consciousness, and so on in an otherwise red state. And I'm just trying to tour you through what little I know of a little bit of Asheville history. And so why don't you take us on up to the hurricane time in whatever way seems right to give us a little sense of you and that community.
okay, well, like I was saying, it was a lovely little small, pristinely clean, lovely community. Nobody paid any attention to it. I mean, there were some Floridians that would go to Asheville in the summer to get out of the heat. So this is where the story gets a little dicey.
Hmm.
Um, the Chamber of Commerce decided that they wanted to expand Asheville's presence on the national stage, and they wanted to make Asheville the Boulder of the East.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted money. Let's just be clear about what this was all about. This wasn't anything other than a minor power grab at some of the available tourist dollars. So the Chamber of Commerce launched this national ad campaign about come to Asheville.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it began. So probably for the first, I lived there 25 years. Probably for the first 10 or 12 years, it was small, it was lovely, it was quiet, it was safe. And then they did this, and they were successful. They were very, very successful. And they brought in the tourists and they threw out all the magnificent artists in the River Arts District who had this was their quarter for their art. There were little warehouses all over the place. We used to go down there at Christmas and they'd have open houses and show all their art. It was such a lovely local thing that I looked forward to every year. It was, we'd go down and buy Christmas presents. Well, they saw that as a really tremendous ability to make a lot of money. So they raised everybody's rents to the point where the artists could no longer afford it,
Mm-hmm.
and they all left. The hippy dippy little reputation that Asheville had, all the little stores downtown, all the mom and pop operations, all the funky little stores that was the main attraction to go to Asheville to begin with, they raised all their rents. And then corporations started like, like Starbucks came in and all these urban outfitters, all these big corporate things that you see in malls. So they they took away the heart of Asheville in order to expand their checkbooks.
Yep.
And everybody in town, like we were heartbroken, we were aghast, we were ashamed, we were dismayed. It was horrifying. And it just, in an instant, the entire complexion of the city changed. Now, it allowed some people to make more money, and everybody was just thrilled. They're making more money, and these big restaurants came in, and the hotels got built. So here we are in this little city that had nothing. With these hotels now, we're charging $400 and $500 a night for people to stay there.
Yep.
Um, it it burned my soul. I
Mm.
mean, it made me so angry that I've been in cities before where I've seen this isn't the first time. I mean, I saw it in Seattle with Fremont was the little funky area, and they did that there too. I saw it in Tampa, Florida, where the Ybor City was the artist district, and they did that in Ybor City too, and ran off all the artists. So this is a national mindset to do this.
Sure. Yeah. It's
But
the
I was
American way.
living, yeah, yeah. So this happened. Now they spent all their money attracting tourists. What Asheville leaders did not do is they didn't update the infrastructure system since 1993. They their priorities were not the safety of the citizens, the priorities were bringing in money.
Hmm.
And so I that contributed to the disaster of the hurricane because the systems were broken. Here's something else nobody knows. This was the third time since I lived there that this has happened. Not to this scale,
Hmm.
but there was a hurricane that came through in 2004 and we didn't have water for 6 days.
Hmm.
And it instantaneously became a third world environment. And then 2 years ago at Christmas, some of the pipes froze in one of the major areas of town, and people didn't have water for 2 weeks. So this was just an exponential event,
Hmm.
the magnitude and the force of the hurricane. So, I mean, I think that's important for people to understand. There's grift and corruption associated with this story. I want to tell this story because I've been trying to get a national organization to tell the story.
Hmm.
Because it needs to be exposed. However, that's an aside. I haven't been successful in doing that. I wrote Democracy Now! And begged them to write the story, but I'll keep trying.
Sure.
But nevertheless, so the city's destroyed.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, so it just went in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
The completely against humanity.
Yeah. Well, I hear that absolutely. And just to remind folks back, a few minutes ago, I just hinted at what you've told me about um, how Asheville really started to have a reputation of being a great place to land
Right.
if you have some collapse awareness going on and you want to still have a culture to be able to live in and some, enjoyable sense of community and so on. What a great spot. Why not? Here you go.
So, right. So there's a couple parts to this. One is that Asheville got put on the map by the Chamber of Commerce bringing people in.
Hmm.
So people became aware of it. And yes, we were, I don't want to say we were arrogant. The people that lived there for a long time, like me, we were quietly congratulating ourselves that we lived there, and we felt it was one of the safest places
Hmm.
in the entire country.
Yeah.
It's landlocked. It's 25 feet, 2,500 feet up in the mountains. Tornadoes didn't get through. We didn't have earthquakes. Um, we didn't have a lot of flooding. I mean, it was idyllic. So, so when people started hearing about Asheville and they would come there and it was safe, they started moving there in droves. So it was safe, it was beautiful. What did happen is the real estate,
Hmm.
the prices skyrocketed.
Yep.
So it was rich people coming there. There were never any jobs there. There was never industry there. There was never corporations. It's just restaurants and tourism.
Sure.
So as the prices went up, people really it was hard to live there. But what happened is 70,000 people moved to Asheville in the last 3 years.
Wow.
Okay. Now, that's where a big chunk of the problem came in because there was a 2007 report by a task force that said the city cannot sustain huge population influx.
Yep.
There, there isn't the infrastructure to support it. So it's not like it was unknown, but people were, people, I mean, climate change for people that are paying attention and can afford it. That's a crucial aspect of this conversation.
Hmm.
Money is a big factor in survival. If you don't have money, you have to have money and resources. So the rich people started moving there, driving up the prices, and using up all the resources. But it was like such this great place. Like everybody walking around in the city, we felt like nothing could happen to us.
Hmm.
How arrogant was that?
We're going to find out.
Yes, you will. But I mean, people know about the hurricane and
Yeah.
Asheville and
Yeah.
everything. But it was between me and my friend, like my friends, we would talk about, the climate aware people. We would have this conversation, like, where else could we possibly live? This has got to be one of the absolute safest places in the country.
Yeah.
So therein lies the rub.
Hmm.
And that's off the chart now. I don't think you can say that about any place ever on the globe anymore. That Asheville, Asheville proved that that is a concept that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
You can't pick a place.
That's an important threshold in this larger story that we're both pointing at. Yep.
It is the story.
Yeah.
It's all right. So I want to say something else too here. This summer, I have a bunch of psychic friends, obviously, and we talk about they're all aware of climate change. And one of my friends called me up one afternoon and she said, "We're gonna get hit."
Mm.
And I said, "What?" And she goes, "Yeah, it's coming." And when she said that, I felt something. I was like, "Uh-oh, she's right." So there's all these climate events happening everywhere in the world. It it wasn't an anomaly to figure out that it could happen anywhere, but Asheville still seemed an improbable destination for a major event.
Yeah.
Like but the National Weather Service said that the 2024 hurricane season was going to be ungodly and the worst in history.
Mhm.
And, you know, Helene hits Florida, right? Hits Florida, does devastating amount of damage. I grew up in Florida. Hurricanes used to be bad storms. They come off the water, they hit land, they do a lot of destruction, but they dissipate immediately because the land breaks up the force. Well,
Mhm.
these storms aren't hurricanes. So this one, when it hit, I don't know what it was, but it just kept going. It never lost its capacity of fierceness.
Yeah.
And they kept saying like that targeting, it's going to hit Asheville. We're all sitting around thinking it'll come up, it'll be, a windstorm, and we'll get some rain.
Mhm.
And we've had bad storms before, and nobody was overly concerned,
Yeah.
except that this is what happened. So this is the climate change piece. There was another storm coming from the west. So September 24th, 25th, 26th, We got torrential rain. So these things that they're calling rain bombs, which is also a new term, relatively new term. So we got a 3-day rain bomb, and it was relent. And so at the same time it's coming this way, the hurricane was going this way, and they collided.
Mhm.
And we got 113 days of rain in 4 days.
Hmm.
That's the storm. The hurricane had tornadoes in it. And you don't see a lot of that either.
Hmm.
Um, this is a climate event that defies language
Yeah.
because nobody has seen anything like this. There aren't, like, I can't articulate it, and it's easier to just to watch it
Hmm.
because experiencing it was it was otherworldly.
Yeah. So I'd like to do another pause that I did before with you a few minutes ago, and to speak a little bit about how how I put it into context, this particularly you and the other seers, the other psychics that you hang out with, so to speak. You all had some pretty strong impressions going on, and they rippled out. Your friends rippled out through you, and you got immediate validation in your own system for it as well. And I would be willing to assert that first, that what's gotten us into this global self self-terminating culture is that we've disconnected from all the primary sources of meaning and relationship in a human life. So that means we've disconnected individually and collectively from our deeper self, from other people, from earth, and from soul. Again, this is just kind of a way we, in a compact way, talk about what got us here in this living resilience and the coursework and the support groups and blah that. So we have a shared language that we can at least talk about what got us here. And then out of this, what kind of practices might we take on that would possibly reconnect us in a good way with deeper self, with others, with earth, with soul. So I consider your sensitivities as a psychic, as a seer, to be, you know, there are also other people who call themselves, oh gosh, highly sensitive people, HSPs, which to me is just another version of seeing, of having an extraordinary sensitivity to what the signals are at whatever scale inside of ourselves, in our relationships with other humans, with earth, and with soul. So I wanted to notice that and mention that because look at what we're doing on a global scale. Just take your pick. If it's the ocean and the coral reefs, or if it's the incredible amount of CO2 that the ocean is absorbing and the heat that the ocean is absorbing, not to mention every other habitat around the world is severely compromised because we have no more ability to relate with Earth. We have forfeited those essential connections to the web of life. So folks like yourself, and in my way, which is a bit different than many psychic folks, but I believe we have some amount of that sensitivity that we've retained or cultivated or grown together. So I just wanted to mention that and put it in context because for me, you and your friends makes total sense. I have also a pretty large circle of friends who are to one degree or another seers. They're to one degree or another available to see at an extraordinary level what's going on energetically in relationships at the most intimate level, all the way out to the global level. So I think that's what we're talking about. But we're going to find out more about you and your seeing and your experiences. And so, are we in the middle of your experience of Helene now? Is that where we are in the story?
Well, let's talk about what you just asked though.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean,
Great.
I mean, I you know, that's worth addressing. Um,
Thank
that I mean that Dean, that's a big question. One of the things I want to say is I don't personally understand how anybody can disconnect from the earth because it's not in me.
Yes.
Okay. However, you witness it because you see it every day. That's what I was talking about with the $23 billion of people on shopping.
Yes.
I think the disconnect has been orchestrated intentionally.
Yes. Absolutely.
Um, I think looking at your cell phone all day, every day is maniacal and evil. And but it's intentional.
Mhm.
So if people don't pay attention to what's going on around them, if they are not outside, so in order to see what's going on, you have to pay attention to the seasons.
Yes.
You have to pay attention to the nuanced changes in your environment. You have to pay attention to the fact that Asheville, for example, when I moved there, there was snow every winter, bad storms, 18 inches of snow, a week in the house, you know, because you couldn't drive. Past 3 Januaries, it's been in the 70s. And when I would try and talk to people that lived there, they'd say, oh, this is normal. Like everybody has selective amnesia. So you ask this question, like, how did this happen?
Hmm.
I don't know, but I don't think it's an accident to have people distracted from the core of what makes them a human being.
Yes.
And when you say what practices can you take on, I mean, my God, if you haven't taken them on now, man,
Hmm.
you know, I think that if your eyes are starting to open like right now, you're going to be absolutely dropped to your knees with what you're looking at. If you're
Hmm.
just awakening now, I, you know, you have to be in the moment. You have to appreciate every single moment that you're alive. Take nothing for granted and thank God that you got to be on planet Earth and enjoy this magnificence because this may be the only place in the universe that this exists. I
Yeah.
mean, we don't know. We don't know.
Hmm.
But Americans, I can't speak to other countries, but Americans just they are not looking at that. And they think their environment is always, I mean, this is a common thread in collapse is that people think resources are infinite,
That's
but
right.
they are not. So I think this is what causes everybody just to go along with status quo and just think that
Hmm.
somebody's going to do something someday and we don't have to worry about it
Yeah.
until something of this magnitude hits and the entire country had to look and say, well, if it happened there, we're in trouble. but then, about a week of that news and it's off the radar and it becomes entertainment again. You just
That's
turn
right.
off your TV. And so if it doesn't hit you, if it doesn't hit you, you don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But I'm here to tell you it's coming for everybody.
Hmm. So
But
there
I
you
don't
were, neck deep in a hurricane that was ramming face first into another storm from the other direction, culminating in this extraordinary, vicious soup where you all are. And you had plenty of premonition and plenty of observation skills to see that this is like unlike anything that anybody alive has seen in this area ever. And there
well
you were.
and there I was. And the storm hits and it hit about 7:30 in the morning, so I could watch it. A lot of times they happen at night. And so I got up, and they had warned us we're going to lose power, the water's going to go out. We were warned, but I mean, it happened to me before. I've been through a lot of hurricanes. I wasn't really concerned. I knew there would be some downtime. And then all of a sudden I start hearing these crashes. And I look out my window and I see my neighbors running around in the street during the hurricane. And I think, oh dear God, what is going, like, you don't go outside during a hurricane. And I was hearing these thunderous impacts. I didn't know what it was. I was watching humans just running around. Like, you could tell they were absolutely distraught. I didn't want to go outside. I wasn't going to go outside. But so when the hurricane, about, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours later, the hurricane moves on and everybody goes outside. Well, every other house on my street had trees on it. And cars were demolished. And, these are all, like, Asheville's built in a national forest. So there's these enormous old growth trees, and it looked like a war zone.
Yeah.
And the trees had been corkscrewed out of the ground, not just fallen over, but this was the tornadic effect.
Hmm.
And we were all standing in the street going, what is this? And you couldn't drive because there's these huge trees everywhere. And I walked down a couple of blocks, and I mean, the destruction was unprecedented. I'd never seen anything like this in my, like, just neighborhoods were just demolished. And so there was no Wi-Fi. There was nothing. So my neighbors and I, somebody had a transistor radio. So we turned it to NPR and they were announcing that the city was going to come on and talk about it. So we all sat on the grass and we were all in shock, and we were waiting to hear what was going on because you couldn't see anything. And the city officials come on and they don't know anything either because
Hmm.
there was so much destruction. But we didn't know. We didn't know at that moment what had happened. And I personally didn't know for about 5 days because there was no communication. So, I have told people before, one of the warnings in these scenarios is you think that this is your community, This is not your community. When there's an event of this magnitude, electronics are not your friend. You need real human beings. Because the minute this disappears, you realize what a complete load of lies we've been sold. And you don't have anything. You know, everybody is in it for themselves. Everybody's alone. Everybody's trying to figure out what they're going to do. We didn't know if stores were open. We didn't know if we could get food. And, you know, about 24, like information started leaking through. And like, in order to hear what was going on, I had to get in my car and turn my car on and listen to my radio in my car. That's the only thing I had. And then what happened with that is, well, I was running out of gasoline in my car. And it turns out that the gas stations, nobody had, you couldn't pay with a credit card because there was no electricity. So they were only taking cash. So what happened was, um, a person you and I both know heard about this. She called a friend of hers in South Carolina to drive to Asheville to give me $100 so I could buy gas. That was like that was the opening salvo of how screwed we were. And you know, but it took me a couple, I couldn't go to the gas station because so many trees were down. I had to wait till crews came to chop the trees up to make a path. Like I lived like, you know, in an urban setting. And then when I could get to the street, it was absolute pandemonium. There were lines for gas probably 3 miles long.
Mm,
And people were fighting and people had guns out and they ran out of gas and like it was mass hysteria.
yeah.
This thing was starting to become clear that this was not just your run-of-the-mill bad storm.
Yep.
And so, you know, then 5 days into this without power or water or Wi-Fi, uh, you couldn't flush your toilet. So Allison thinks that she's going to, you know, be, you know, pioneer woman. And there's a creek down the street from my house, and I got buckets, and I drove down the street and got in the creek and got creek water because I'm thinking how smart I am and how innovative I was. And I brought this creek water back to my house so I could flush my toilet because I had drinking water. But you don't realize how much water you use as a
Mm,
human being on a daily basis until you don't have water.
yeah. So,
And that started getting very scary.
yeah.
So a friend of mine called and she said, I have water and power and you can come to my house.
Wow.
So that was about day 5 or 6. So I went to her house and she had videos and, you know, the national news was reporting. So this was the first time I knew how bad it was. And because they, you know, they sent crews in, I guess, you know, um, and, I was watching it for the first time, like cities all over the region were destroyed underwater, 30 feet of water. The historic district, you know, the Vanderbilt, Biltmore Estate, um, all of the surrounding area was underwater. Streets were gone, whole cities were gone. Buildings looked like little matchsticks. And this compounded my personal stress. I mean, I don't know how do you gauge stress? But so I was at her house for 2 days, and then she is like, she was stressed out and her family was stressed out, and she's like, you got to leave.
Yeah.
And then I realized how much trouble I was in because I was alone. So being alone in a disaster is not a good thing, which is I've been trying, Dean, for about 2 or 3 years to try and see if I could get any interest in within my group of friends to put together a working community so we can all live together because collapse is coming.
Yeah.
And now it's more important than ever to try and get some communities so that we can try and weather what is now a certainty. Because right now, I'm in California right now, and 3 hours away is the Malibu fire that's raging through Malibu that's burned 4,000 acres. And 2 days ago, I woke up and the sky here is covered in smoke, and I'm choking from the smoke. Like I'm going from one climate disaster to another.
Hmm.
So it's getting a little daunting.
Yeah. I'm taken back to the very first time you told me this part of the story, and I remember really being shaken by the simple sentences you used to convey this is this is not a normal situation. This is not going to be recover in a couple of weeks and then everybody has a big party down at the town hall. This is different. And you actually use some different words. Could you just take us to that point? Because it seemed like it was a pivotal moment, pivotal realization that really started this journey that we're headed toward in the second and hopefully a third chapter of this story. Can you take us to that kind of
Yes,
moment
I
when you
will.
really saw it?
Yeah, so when my friend asked me to leave, um, having been with other humans made me feel secure, and I realized when I got back to my house that I was in trouble. By that time, they were saying a month until we got water back, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months. And I could not figure out what I was going to do because I was alone. Um, I could cook because I had gas, a gas stove. What I couldn't do was wash my dishes because you need voluminous amounts of water to wash your dishes and then rinse your dishes because you don't want to get bacteria. And like, so I was cooking, but after I would cook, I would throw the pots away. Like I couldn't, I wasn't innovative enough. I really was I was out of my own personal resources. And then I really started to freak out. And one day, probably the next day, one of my friends in Florida called me because she was watching it, and she said, you have to get out of there. And she said, they're saying on the news that all the water is contaminated. And I decided, and I wonder if this is what you're alluding to, but I thought that what I was going to do was kill myself.
Hmm.
I mean, that was my that was my plan B. I had nowhere to go. I had no resources. I didn't have food. I didn't have any help. And I cannot tell you the level of fear that I was experiencing. And I just thought, yep, that's smart. Yeah, that's what I'll do because
Mm.
um I don't have anything at all.
Hmm.
And I planned the whole thing. I mean, I was like, this will be easy. I got nobody to help me at all. And my family in Florida, they had just gone through two hurricanes. I had nothing. So this becomes, you talk about an existential crisis. And I was like, well, I cannot live without water. I mean, you cannot do that, not in America.
Yeah. So it went from a brief respite with a
Yeah,
friend who had some electricity, was kind enough to give you, I don't know how long you stayed, but you got a chance to have normalcy for a moment, and then it's gone.
right. I got a shower, I cooked some food, and I got to sleep.
Yeah.
And I thought that was restorative. And I thought, well, yeah, I'm good. If they get the water on them the next week, I'll be fine. But when the news started trickling out that like all of the entire reservoir had collapsed, and it was so bad, the collapse in the reservoir, they were going to have to rebuild the road to get to the reservoir before they could fix the water.
Hmm.
And when I heard that, I was like, okay, it's going to be 3 months.
Yeah.
And that's where I was like, um, nobody told me how to do this. I don't know anybody I can call up to tell me how to live by myself without water.
Yeah.
And part of the intrinsic danger in this scenario is everybody that I know was experiencing the same degree of trauma. So talking to each other was not helpful
Yeah.
because everybody was experiencing their own traumatic events.
Yeah. And if I may just pop in one of those pauses again, this is another part of this living resilience work, and it's we often do it in stages. And this is one of the first stages you're describing right now, which I call the first aid level of resilience skills. This is basic self-regulation, basic co-regulation, and all that regulate, it's a clinical word I don't care for much, but it basically just means, is there some way I can bring some amount of my awareness back into my body? Because I'm
Right.
out of my body. I'm so freaked out. I'm so traumatized. I'm so shifted. I'm not even in my body. I can't think straight. Life is upside down. And so this seems like what you're describing. And what I can tell you from working in a number of environments in which I would teach this first aid level of resilience skills at this first stage of how do we cope with this massive whatever the trauma is in the situation. And what I've seen time and time again for at least this last decade is unless somebody is in it like the way you're describing being in it, we just don't have any interest in learning these skills. Like, why the hell would I want to learn about contemplative meditation? Or why would I learn these simple ways? I'm squeezing my thighs right now, which is a very simple exercise that add it to three or four others, and I can start to feel myself coming back little by little into my own body, into my own awareness in this traumatic chaos that's going around, be it hurricanes, be it fires, be it floods, wherever you are around the world. So you were in that. And this feels like a pretty good place to draw the line at the end of this chapter one,
Okay.
because you've really come to this realization that's right at the edge of that of a cliff. There's not a lot of choices here.
I didn't have any at that moment, no.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I again just so appreciate every time I get to hear another segment of your story or experience. I don't know how to do it any better than you first described. It was one of the first things you described is how you kind of process this kind of stuff. And it had to do with presence, had to do with how can I be more present? And that means sometimes being present to, I don't know how to do this so much that I might need to check out. I might need to commit suicide. So there's these layers of realness that a person who has their wits somewhat about them, like you had somehow, you were able to be clear enough to tell yourself the truth moment by moment.
Well, I'm going to say something that sounds really counterintuitive, but admitting to myself that suicide was an option was kind of like a release valve.
Sure. Yeah.
And I know that sounds that doesn't make sense, but that was how I regulated my nervous system.
Mhm.
Because as soon as I gave myself permission to do that, I don't know why, but it lowered the temperature.
Yes.
Because I thought, well, that's an option. And then what could the other options possibly be?
Mhm.
And it was very helpful. I know if I say this to a therapist, they probably throw you in the hospital, right? But this isn't the same thing. This isn't like something happened and I did it. It's something completely out of my control that I had no comprehension of how to navigate this.
Yeah.
And that's the scary thing about these stories is
Yeah.
they are going to happen all over the place to a lot of people. I'm not the only one. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
thousands of people out there like me.
Yeah. Well, Allison, I'm so glad we're doing this, because this has been a very, very difficult part of offering services, offering resources, offering practices to the collapse aware and collapse acceptant communities. This has been perhaps the toughest bottleneck of all, to offer these kind of self-regulation, co-regulation, resilience skills that you and I are going to keep peppering in these three chapters of this story. Because if we don't have to think about or feel this kind of uncomfortable existential dread, then I don't wanna.
No,
And so I don't want to learn about this. I don't want to hear about this until I can hear about it on my deathbed when somebody else tells me about how they had a bad time. And what I hear you so beautifully saying is that this is no longer an isolated, faraway thing. This is anywhere, could happen anytime, could happen to anybody at any income level, in any privileged country or global South country. It's everybody.
It is now. I mean, if it happened in Asheville,
Hmm.
it feels like the hand of God. It's almost as if something somewhere wanted people to pay attention.
Hmm.
I'm not saying, it was preordained somewhere, but
Right.
it it's ironic and it drives home the point that there is no safe place
Yeah.
and that we need a different way of living our lives now, and we need each other face to face in person. And I'm going to keep looking for that
Yeah.
out in the world.
Yeah. You and me both. You and me both. I'd like to also plant the seed with the folks who are watching this recording. And if you're interested enough, especially to join us for the next two chapters, please put some comments in the show notes and let us know what sort of experiences, excuse me, what sort of experiences does this call up in you? What sort of experiences resonate from your own history of things that have happened to you and your family or your community, or things that you've heard of that were so strong as to impact you from perhaps halfway around the planet? I know that I've had recently and for some years been frequently hit by waves, energetic waves of just getting what the impact is energetically, even if I don't know much about the story of what's happening. I'd be very curious if there are folks who are watching this who could share what are the inner resources and what are the outer resources that you've been able to call on when you've been in a traumatic situation. You've been in a extraordinarily demanding, challenging, possibly even existentially threatening situation. Could you, if you're willing, please share with us what are some of those resources, particular people, relationships, earth, whatever it is for you. I'd be thrilled if you would please feel free to leave those comments, leave those story fragments, if you will. That's really what the work of living resilience is, particularly this year. We're doing a year-long program called Islands of Sanity in a Mad World, in which I'm asserting that we are in an insane world. We're literally self-terminating and then pretending as if everything's just fine. And so what I'm inviting you all to do is to participate. Participate in a way that you share your stories, share the resources that have been useful for you, share perhaps what's been inspiring in spite of that. Um, this is really, for me, conversations worth having at a time when it is so, so crucial to find our people. As Allison's been saying time and again here, it's time for community, time to come together, to hold space for one another, for the most excruciating chapter in human history. So, Allison, thanks so much again for taking this time to tell your story in three or more parts. And I look very much forward to the next time we're going to get together. And
Thank you, Dean.
is there anything that you would like to say to just kind of wrap up this chapter and what you know we've explored together, what you've shared with us and what we've explored? Is there anything you'd like to say to just wrap it up for folks who are listening?
Well, I appreciate people listening to this. Um, I didn't try and make it as scary. I'm just trying to help people have a forward vision so that they're prepared
Mhm.
and they don't get caught off guard like I did.
Yeah.
Because this has been a nightmare. And if I can help anybody, by sharing the story, um, we can have an ongoing dialogue. We can help each other. We can be optimistic in the face of this. We can have hope. We can have love, and we can enjoy our lives. And we're just living in these extraordinary times.
Yes.
And I think that we have to just be honest about it, just make space for the truth.
Mhm. Yeah. And you do a good job of that. Allison, thank you again. And everybody else, we'll see you in chapter 2 sometime soon. Poetry of Predicament.
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell